This podcast is brought to you by Bonus Room Productions and We Own This Town.
I am Jason T. Mears, Esquire.
And I'm Kelly Hoyle-Bolick.
And we are San Dimas Today. How's it going, Kelly?
My dude, it's going great. How are you doing?
I'm doing fantastic, man. I'm sitting here in this room with you, getting ready to talk about some Bill and Ted.
That's right. We're back for another sweet episode of San Dimas Today. We've got a great interview coming up, but first, I believe we wanted to discuss a little guitar shredding, didn't we?
Yeah, I like guitars. I like the sound that they make. I think they look pretty. I appreciate it when people can play them well.
Yeah.
I can't do any of those things.
Well, you know I love guitars, right?
Yeah. You have a couple, don't you?
I have a few. One that's especially baby blue. But not that I would consider myself a shredder or a great guitar player, but I do love playing guitar.
Okay. Well, I think you're very good at it, sir.
You know how good I wish I was? I wish I was good as Steve Salas, Jim Martin, and Steve Vai.
I wish I was as good as you, so I guess there's a ladder that we're going on.
Well, one rung at a time, my friend.
Okay, thank you. Something people might not know about Kelly and his guitar playing, he is left-handed. But you play your guitar as if you were right-handed, right?
I do, because it makes more sense to me that way.
Yeah.
I believe my dominant hand should be on the fretboard and not picking the guitar. But feel free to disagree, listeners. We'll welcome your feedback on Facebook, Instagram, and Twitter.
Well, Kelly will. I won't. No, absolutely. And speaking of feedback on Facebook, Instagram, and Twitter, we heard back from a listener with some input from one of our most recent episodes.
We did.
We had, when we were talking about Beethoven, you were talking about the scene in the music store where he's playing at the keyboard, fiddling around, and then it goes from that into Extreme's Play With Me.
Right.
And you had posited that maybe the intro to Play With Me was a Beethoven piece.
Right. Like in a perfect world, that's what it would be, right?
Right. But as our listener Kurt pointed out, it is actually Mozart.
Okay.
Yeah.
Which is fine.
Yeah. I don't know the difference, man. So,
is there any reason Beethoven wouldn't be playing a Mozart piece?
No, not that I'm aware of.
Did we check up on that?
No, we didn't.
Are we going to be hearing from Kurt again now?
I guarantee no matter what we do, we will be hearing from Kurt again.
That's awesome. Well, thank you, Kurt. I appreciate that clarification. I did look that up afterwards. And
don't steal his thunder. Do not steal his thunder.
Sorry, Kurt. Keep calling us out. We love to call each other out. And we're actually going to have a whole episode later on where we're going to do that exact thing.
I don't know if it's going to be a whole episode. Maybe it'll just be like a segment on an episode. So
we're going to go back and see how wrong we really were about everything.
Which, if history has taught us anything, it's that we've been wrong about everything.
That's right. If only we had a time-traveling phone booth.
Yes, I know. So these men who shred.
The Bill and Ted's movies, one of the great features, right, is that Bill and Ted are probably the greatest air guitar players in the history of cinema.
I mean, didn't they almost create it? I don't know.
I feel like it. Would there be air guitar championships? Like, I'm serious, professional air guitar championships without the Bill and Ted movies?
No, there would not be.
Okay.
No, there would not be.
The guy who did all the shredding in the first movie is a dude named Steve Salas, who is just an incredible LA studio musician. And he ends up doing the solo that Rufus plays at the end, which is fantastic.
Yeah, awesome.
Which I believe those are Steve's hands and guitar, obviously, that you see. But nice to imagine Rufus having that kind of skill and ability.
Yeah, it's part of that Hollywood beautiful fakery where they do the body close-up whenever anybody is playing an instrument.
But, in the Bill and Ted utopian future, everybody has to shred, right?
Absolutely. I mean, why would you not? Music is so important that you're going to learn the fundamentals.
Yeah. And so the second movie comes along, and we've got different guitar players. You have the one and only Steve Vai, who we've talked about in a previous podcast, mentor to Dweezil Zappa, student of Frank Zappa. And then you have Jim Martin from Faith No More.
Which we've also talked about in a previous episode.
That's right.
These men could shred. They could shred, and they did shred. So let me ask you this. Bill and Ted Face the Music. Who do you get to shred?
I didn't really look and see what old Steve's up to, Salas.
Yeah.
But might dip back into that Steve Vai well. That's
think so?
probably where I go.
All right.
I feel like my gamble would be that he would get the nod.
Okay.
But
well, if you could
maybe somebody new. Maybe is that what you're
yeah,
asking? Maybe?
I mean, like if
go more contemporary.
You could go either way. If you want to go back to one of the original films,
could we get a Stephen Malkmus shredding? It would be a little lazier, but maybe indicative of growing older, right?
Right. I mean, if you're doing that, then I'd also throw out Courtney Barnett. I mean,
okay,
that's
fair.
Too.
I would take that.
If you're going to go that way, then faux show.
So why are we talking about music right now?
Well, one, music's really important to Bill and Ted.
Yeah.
Like it is the reason that Bill and Ted exist and like their main thing. They're musicians.
Right, and I love the decisions that were made by whoever involved to get, musicians acting and having cameos in the movie. Like all that lends itself to the Bill and Ted. They love music. Love music.
And if you're going to do a movie about music, you know what you need? A top-notch composer.
That's right. And boy, did they ever get a top-notch composer.
I mean, one of the greatest composers working today, for sure.
That's right.
Not only prolific, but incredibly talented.
Right. We're talking about David Newman. He's done over 100 films in his career. Incredible stuff from when we were young. Tommy Boy, Serenity, Galaxy Quest.
And doing stuff now, like things that I'm seeing over and over again, thanks to my daughter's penchant for watching the Scooby-Doo movies on repeat. This guy is all over the map, and he has done such an amazing job in these films of like being the hand behind the scenes that guides you emotionally as you're watching these films. He's just so good. And why are we talking about David Newman?
Because we interviewed David Newman, and you're about to hear that interview.
We got to talk to David Newman. This is incredible. So what is about to follow is roughly 30 minutes of pure informational joy. We learned so much, not only about the making of the movie and Stephen Herrick's singular vision for the film, but also how David got into composing and what he's doing now. He even talks about a little bit about the odds of Bill and Ted 3. So
why don't you spoil the entire interview?
I'm sorry. I'm just so excited. This thing is so great.
All right, so here you go. This is our interview with David Newman.
Excellent!
David Newman, thank you so much for joining us.
Sure, glad to do it.
So how did you get into composing?
I come from a film music family, but I had no intention of writing film music or honestly any kind of music. I had no intention of being a composer. I wanted to be a conductor, and I was making a living as a violinist in Los Angeles in my 20s. So from about after I graduated undergraduate, I got a degree in violin performance, and I just started working in the studios here like a bunch of us did that were in town and had made connections and all that. And so I worked in the studios from about late 76 to about 83 or 84. And then I just decided that was going nowhere. My conducting stuff was going nowhere. I'd learned a lot. I got a master's degree also at SC in conducting, and I was studying privately very diligently conducting, which has been a passion of mine all my life, sort of, on and off, which is now very glad I did it because of all the conducting I'm doing now with films with live orchestra. But for me, film music was a decision. I just decided that I was going to try. So in those days, there really wasn't much of a sampler technology. I mean, there was if you were kind of really on the fringes, or if you were a pop music producer or something, it was somewhat easier. But the only way to demo anything was to get live musicians and just overdub on 2-inch tape, 24-track tape. And of course, I had a lot of friends that were instrumentalists that I'd grown up with playing, weddings and church jobs and studio gigs and all kinds of stuff. So I got a bunch of people together and I recorded a demo of two different pieces. And one was kind of in the style of that sort of late 70s wasn't really Star Wars, but it was a big, huge, lush orchestra piece. And one was kind of a horror movie cue, which was kind of there was a lot of horror movies at that time, so it seemed another good genre to do. But it really took me about 4 or 5 years to learn how to get through it at all, because I really had no experience composing. And it's sort of interesting because I'm very interested in Alfred Newman. Alfred Newman was my father. He died in 1970, but I'm very interested in how he came to Hollywood. He was in Hollywood in 1930. Him and Steiner were one of the first of that generation to be here. And my father had been a pit conductor in New York and also had no real experience actually composing. He'd had experience arranging for musical theater for a bit, but he had to learn how to do it as well. And that's completely unlike my brother, Thomas, who was composing normally, as a teenager, and then and went to school and studied composition, and it was a really different kind of last minute thing for me. And then I got a couple of like industrial films, just because that was kind of stuff that was happening, like political films and other things that were sort of going on at the time. And then I got that Steve Herrick film, his first film, which was Critters, which was, I think the studio was New World. It was Bob Shea, who eventually ended up doing. They did Lord of the Rings famously way later. Mm-hmm. But that was how I met Steve, and that's how I ended up getting, being on Bill and Ted. I mean, basically, Critters and another movie I did, which was an animated Disney film called Brave Little Toaster, I did very early on, and I kind of learned how to write on those movies. So it was very late in my life.
That's really cool that you made that decision. You were able to actually make it happen. That's very impressive.
Yeah, I don't dispute that I come from a family where it's no one's going to say don't do it. You're an idiot. You do it. But and I'm not saying I didn't have any help, but it was really, really difficult for me. It was very difficult to learn how to orchestrate. Even though I had orchestration training, there is just no way to teach orchestration. All you can do is trial and error. You do the best you can, and you learn from your mistakes, because your mistakes are so humiliating, which is a really good thing in a way. In terms of learning, if you can stand the pain and humiliation of making a mistake, it's where you learn the most, quite frankly. Mm-hmm. So I learned it. I mean, look, I'm a trained musician. My father made sure Tom and I and my sister, we were all trained very early on. All of us played violin. We all played in orchestras. We all knew the repertoire. My dad made sure that we were trained, and my mom particularly implemented it. So I'm not saying that, we didn't, I had the training to figure this out. It wasn't like I was, didn't have any training, but I never thought of myself as a composer. It's still hard for me to think of myself as a composer, which I also think it was hard for my father, for Alfred, in that it's such this throwing around of the word of artist and genius and da-da-da-da-da, when so much of film music is about craft, and craft being a wonderful word and a wonderful kind of way to work as a person in an arts field. 99% of it is slogging through stuff and trying to make things work when it's not easy, and changing and revising, and then you pull movies into the mix, which are so little understood what a movie is. I mean there is a path to learn, but you really have to find your own voice in it somehow, and so all that went into that. But I would say by the time I got through Critters, and then Throw Mama from the Train, which was my first film with DeVito, which went on to be a great relationship. And Steve, and then Bill and Ted, which was, had a very tortured history. I assume you guys know about that.
Oh, yes. Yeah. We spoke to Chris Matheson a few weeks ago, and we've lived and breathed Bill and Ted for decades now. So yeah, we are very familiar.
I think Steve was just Steve. I don't know if you've talked to Steve, but he's like a bulldog. He just would not give up. Nobody understood that movie except him.
We got that impression from Chris Matheson for sure. He said he was the perfect director for it, and he had talked about earlier directors who tried taking a stab at it and just got it all wrong. But you guys got it completely right.
The script read really smart and sophisticated. For some reason, when you read the script, it seemed kind of like Harvard, comedy, like writers from Saturday Night Live or Second City. It seemed irreverent and like sarcastic, and that just wasn't Steve's take on it. Steve's take was the kind of love for music and these kind of idiot guys that are, that obviously spawned. I mean, you can see what it spawned after it came out, but my God, it was like torture. For Steve, I think just trying to make the marketing people understand what it was, and we had a great time scoring it, and I think that the post-production wasn't tortured. It just was sort of the after, once the movie was kind of done. It's hard to describe because I think everyone that read the script had this impression of what it was, and it just wasn't what it was. But somehow it read that that's what it was. It is sophisticated in a way, but it's not this irreverent. I don't want to use the word cynical, and of course we're looking at from our point of view now, way in the future. But Steve had a really clear concept that was hard to describe to anybody. It seemed like that was my impression of it.
Yeah, and I can totally see that as a fan of the film, especially the first one. It's powered by pure joy almost. I could see how you could take the concept and look at it and say, okay, this guy's being cynical about these two dumb kids, but it's the power of that movie is like their just pure joy,
right? Their lovability.
Right. Yeah,
it's not right. It's not like Zelig or what was that movie? Zelig, the Zemeckis movie. Was that movie or the one where the guy? Well, like Forrest Gump. He's always in the right place at the right time. Mm-hmm. So the script sort of read like they're just so lucky, and all this great stuff happens to them, and yeah, it's motivated, but they're just kind of floating through. And I think Steve really played what you said, the joy of it, the love of music, even though they don't know what they're doing. That's the fundamental, driver of culture. It's just the love of the thing. And some people are better at it than others. Some people have more training. Some people have more education. But still, the bottom line is just the love of it. And I think that's what he's a very unusual director. Everything I did with Steve was really thoughtful on his part and really not unexpected. I don't think he gets enough credit for what he accomplished or has accomplished,
Mm-hmm. I would definitely agree with that. I mean, I don't hear him discussed enough. Obviously, we love these movies. We're here doing an entire show about it, but, it just formative for us, for sure.
Right.
What age group are you guys? How old are you guys?
Oh, we're 40s. We're
40 years old, right on the dot.
Right.
So I'm in my 60s. So, it was way early on for me, as well. I came at it as a craftsperson working on it, as a composer working on it. And then I know, you would notice Saturday Night Live and, Wayne's World and all this stuff that sort of became, and then Judd Apatow, all that kind of buddy, silly stuff. is derived from Bill and Ted. Those kinds of movies aren't really made. I guess they are sort of made, but they're a little raunchier and hipper and meaner in a way. There was an era of movies at that point. I remember Tommy Boy. I came in really late. It was very, very, very tempt. There's lots of influences in that score from other stuff. But I remember doing that, and I got a note from Lorne Michaels, because it was was Coneheads before that or after that? I think Coneheads was before that.
It was.
So
yep.
That was Lorne Michaels, and I'd done that, and that was just. I mean, I really liked the score for Coneheads, but it was really tricky working on that, But Tommy Boy just, But I remember getting a note. We went to a preview and we got to chat with Chris Farley and David Spade. It was so cool at the time. We were young, and it was really, my wife and I. It was on the Paramount lot, and it was really fun. And then Lorne Michaels wrote me a note, and it said, "Sometimes we get it right." And I thought that there were a couple of movies like that I did, like Bowfinger was another movie.
Oh yeah,
that was like torture to do, but it's just there's a sense of, like you said, there's a sense of joy in it. Just it's irreverent, it's funny, it doesn't hold punches, but it's joyous in a way, and that was that era. And I think Bill and Ted was sort of, I don't know, I'd have to look at the movies before, but it sort of was the beginning. I think Steve sort of understood this, that the heart of the movie is the heart of the movie, not obviously it needs to be funny and it needs to have a good story, and you need to cast it correctly, obviously. That Chris Farley and David Spade are just, it's like gold, those guys together, like Keanu and Alex. So you definitely need that, but it was a little bit of a different sensibility, I think, to where it's sort of gone now. Obviously, the music is all, 80s and 90s film scoring, which is like miles different than what you can do now. That's another conversation, and there are other reasons for that. But Bill and Ted is still sort of, it's eclectic, but it's still sort of thematically based or leitmotif based. It has recurring motives and music that's somewhat identifiable, which is just not the way it is now.
When you signed on to do Bogus Journey, you have a different director with that movie, Peter Hewitt. How did that differ from doing Excellent Adventure? I
hardly ever even spoke to Peter Hewitt. It was Scott Kroof who shepherded that movie, and it was a much bigger orchestra. How many years after the first one was that one, the Bogus?
Bogus came out in 91, I think.
Right, so it's about 5 years. When did Bill and Ted come out?
Well, that was released 89, right? But you filmed it a lot earlier.
I think it was done in 87. Yeah.
Right. So yeah, about 4 or 5 years.
Yeah. So it was a long time before they figured out a sequel such as it is, and the sequel is a whole different, I think, kettle of fish, because it's so gothic and grand, and there are these, huge set pieces of heaven and hell, and it's just a different. I think it's a different sort of movie. I do really like the score to Bogus Adventure. There are cues in that I really to this day I still like, which most of the stuff I write I don't really like, but but it was a completely different experience, where the first one I was working basically only with Steve. This one was more with Scott and Peter a little bit, but kind of not. It was kind of quicker. It was done. It was more showing up at the session and doing the score. Where Steve, it was really a different experience. I love the second film too. It's just a different kind of it was a different kind of experience.
That's really interesting. It's amazing what a different director or even a different studio, I guess, at that point.
And a bigger budget, I'm assuming, too.
It was a bigger budget. It was still Interscope, right? But did somebody else distribute it?
Yeah, the first one had been filmed, and then it was in the can for a while because the studio went bankrupt, and they got picked up by New Line, I believe, or Orion. And then, so whoever did the second one, I think Kelly's looking it up now, but there was some definite differences there.
And it really was a different movie because it was so grand. They decided to go really big, grand with it, which I didn't think that was a bad decision. It was great for music. I mean, there was great music stuff to do in it.
Oh yeah, absolutely.
I think the two Hell and Heaven sequences, I think, that we scored were much longer than ended up in the film. But it was and that whole thing with the rabbit and the military thing, and I love the beginning, the Bill and Ted University, but the whole opening into the Bill and Ted University stuff was great fun to write and to do. And by that time, I was kind of doing 5 or 6 movies a year, so I was I was more experienced by then. It was a little bit later. It was a little bit later into my career, obviously, and I was a little more comfortable with what I was doing. So I'm not saying I think it's any better or anything. It's a whole different vibe.
Right.
It was more of a bunch of people working on something. The first one was just Steve Herrick dragging everyone along with him.
Five movies a year, that's a breakneck pace. That's got to be kind of crazy. Were you doing some of them at the same time, or were you focused on one and then move on to the next?
No, lots of people now. I'm not working as much now because the movies that I used to do aren't really being made. But people that are working now are doing 4, 5, 6 movies a year. Maybe I'm doing 2 or 3 a year now. But it ebbs and flows, the career of a film composer. You have your ups and downs. Everyone does. Maybe with the exception of John Williams, but even Goldsmith did, and Alan Silvestri did. So you kind of do what you have to do, and you can generally juggle a couple of films because no one's schedule ever stays the same. I think there's a great story. I don't know if you know this, but Basil Polidorus, the composer. Do you know who that is?
I am unfamiliar, sadly. I apologize.
He did Conan the Barbarian.
Oh, okay, yeah.
Okay.
Anyway, big. He died fairly young, unfortunately. Wonderful guy. Anyway, he was contracted to do Dances with Wolves. Do you know that movie?
Yes.
Oh yeah. Tatanka.
Okay, so that's an Academy Award movie if there ever was one. Mm-hmm. Whoever did the score, and John Milius, his best friend and who gave him his break, had another film, and so he had to get off Dances with Wolves to do this other film. This Flight of the Navigator was called it. John Milius did.
Oh, we know Flight of the Navigator. Yep.
Yeah. So because of scheduling issues, and then Flight of the Navigator moved a year, so he could have done. For Kevin Costner, who was the director, he could have done Dances with Wolves. So a lot of us look at these things and say, they say it's going to be here and here and here, and just hell with it. We're just going to punt and hope for the best. So because no one's saying they don't have to do the movie here at this exact date. It's everything's porous. So when you are building a career, hopefully you have an agent has some oomph and can help you, and you just hope for the best. You don't try to not do something because of the schedule, if you can help it. So that's how that was. So for me, all through the late 80s and 90s and up till about 2010, I was doing like 5 or 6 movies a year. Some would overlap, but I never had a situation where it was not doable, ever. Something always moved around to where it was possible, you know? And you have to be very disciplined in schedule and careful, but that's sort of the way it was.
It certainly seems to have worked for you, you know? One thing I did want to ask you about, what I noticed is that you scored Galaxy Quest, and it's that director who's actually attached to Bill and Ted 3, and I didn't know if anyone's approached you about scoring that movie.
If that movie gets made, great. I think we will do it. It's just a matter, just because movies are announced, as you know,
right,
doesn't mean they're going to get made.
Yeah.
So, there's that movie. There's a script, I think, and they're working on it, but it doesn't mean that it will for sure get made. Well, I assume at some point there will be a sequel, because I think the actors want to do it. So I think it's just a matter of I've been through a lot of this stuff with remakes. And, we were going to do a TV show of Galaxy Quest,
right?
And Alan Rickman died.
Yep,
that got really close. Had Alan Rickman not died, we very well might be doing it. But then Seth MacFarlane made the Orville, which is kind of close to You just never. You never know about this stuff. Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. So I've learned not to predict anything. People get all amped up and they want to book you and they want to do all this stuff, and then you hear nothing. And so when you work a lot, you kind of figure this out, that everything's in flux until they actually start shooting and they start spending money. And once they start spending money, then it's a go.
Well, promise us that if you need somebody to spearhead a letter writing campaign, that you will contact us, because we're your guys. We will do this.
That's for sure.
I think the script is really good. Yeah. So not that I've read it, but it would be a blast to do it. So and Dean Pariseau is the perfect person, aside from Steve, I guess, that would, to do something, irreverent with it.
We absolutely agree.
Yeah, it seems like a great match. And Chris told us it sounds like they've got a couple more hoops to get through before they can actually start shooting.
I think there's probably more than a couple. I think it's probably.
Yeah.
So, but it doesn't mean it's a good property. I think it will eventually get made, especially in our culture with the sequel kind of thing. It's a perfect thing to sequel. Mm-hmm. If you come up with a good idea, they come up with a good idea.
David, we want to thank you so much for coming on and speaking with us. This has been amazing. We really appreciate it.
Thank you so much. So I'm glad you guys are doing this. I think these Bill and Teds are very much underrated and deserve to be looked at and unpacked a little bit, because I think they were very, very, very influential in our culture.
We couldn't have said it better ourselves. Thank you so much.
All right, man. Thank you so much. Okay, later. Thanks.
Right. Was I wrong?
You were not wrong.
That was so cool.
And I think he's a fan of our podcast.
It sounded like it to me. We have our first official fan.
That's right. David Newman, you are a friend of the pod.
Yes. Welcome. I not only loved hearing about Stephen Herrick and like what effect his directing had on the actual movie, and
right,
creating it to the actual what we know and love.
Right, like how cool was hearing his perspective on all of that, right?
I'll be honest, I was not expecting it. I was not expecting to learn something like that. Then hearing the anecdote about Lorne Michaels with Tommy Boy.
Yeah.
Tommy Boy is one of my all-time favorites. Mm-hmm. And just hearing about that was great. And how cool is it that he's already worked with Dean Pariseau, if I'm pronouncing his name correctly, mm-hmm, who's been tapped to direct Bill and Ted Face the Music.
Yep.
I mean, hopefully we'll get some continuity there with Mr. Newman doing all three Bill and Ted films.
Right. Hopefully so. He didn't seem to know. I don't want to say he was cynical about the prospects of the third movie, but he just, he's not counting his chickens until it happens because that's Hollywood, baby.
It is. I feel like at this point there are only two people on the planet that are really getting their hopes up for Bill and Ted Face the Music, and that is Jason T. Mears Esquire and Kelly Hoyle Bullock. But it's going to happen.
Yeah, and Alex Winter seems really excited on Twitter too.
Yeah.
Alex Winter, are you out there?
Give us a call, buddy. Give us a call. All right, Kelly, this has been I am so excited we got to talk to that guy.
Right. Fantastic episode. We always want to thank Scott Bricklin and Scooby Tunes Music for letting us use Walk Away. It's the riff that never stops riffing.
It does not. I hear that every time we start this thing, and it immediately jazzes me up.
We also want to thank Michael Eads and We Own This Town for producing this podcast and getting us out there to you, the listeners. Please go to weownthistown.net. Lots of great podcasts on there. And as always, people, please be excellent to each other.
And party on, dudes!
Find us on Facebook, Instagram, and Twitter at San Dimas Today. Stream it on Spotify. All right, I'll make it work. It'll be fine.
I'm done.
I got 2 weeks to edit that, so it's fine.
You start tonight.
Yeah. Shit.